Hello, I'm Sandy Wolfwood of Westminster's Social Justice Team. Today we welcome Mary Baumgartner, the statewide organizer for one of Westminster's partners in advocacy, the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition. Many of you have participated, who have participated in these forums over the years know that JRLC is a coalition of people of faith who come together to lobby the legislature on issues of common agreement. Mary works in part on voter education and outreach, and during this election season, Westminster's Social Justice Team, which sponsors these forums, wanted to lead off the year with voter education, particularly given the new challenges many face in voting during a pandemic. Voting will look very different this year, so we are grateful Mary is here and has assembled a panel of experts to lay out our options. And just a note, in presenting these forums, we hope you will come away ready to engage and take what you learn here to help others. We build our forums around a common theme, and this year our theme is Wade in the Water, Becoming Anti-Racist. This theme provides a lens into every topic we present, and today we want to stress that we are all responsible for addressing an unjust system that often disenfranchises people of color, including making it harder for them to vote. With that, I'll turn it over to Mary.
Thank you, Sandy. As you mentioned, I'm the statewide organizer at the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition. We do interfaith advocacy on social justice issues, and we have Jewish, Catholic, Muslim, and Protestant partners. During election years, we also work on doing voter education and engagement, so I'm really excited to join all of you today. And I've actually been looking forward to this for over a month now, and I'm thrilled with the panelists we have here with us. Today we have Michelle Chang, who is the Policy and Equity Coordinator at the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. We also have Greta Gates, who is the Policy and Advocacy Manager at Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity. And we have Shonda Allen, who is a JRLC board member and an election judge. So before we dive into the great content that they'll share with us, I'm going to have Ann Krisnick, who is our Executive Director at JRLC, and she will be sharing with us a brief legislative update and discuss kind of the status of where things are with the legislature. So Ann, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be able to join you today. We are so grateful to have Westminster as one of our really star congregational members. And in fact, if you go to our webpage and you look at congregational membership, you'll see that the picture is of your congregation at Westminster. Elections matter. We talk about advocacy being important, but elections matter. It matters who you're talking to, what they are familiar with, and what they know. And so I just want to talk briefly about the issues that we asked you to advocate for over the last few months and what's happened. In light of COVID-19, we've seen a lot of Minnesota families struggling. We've seen people with difficulty not having jobs, not being able to pay rent, not being able to buy food. And we've asked you to advocate on two specific aspects of that. One was we worked to try to get a one-time payment to Minnesota's lowest income families, those participating in the Minnesota Family Investment Program. These are people who are working retail and hospitality jobs, who are cleaning homes and aren't eligible for unemployment. And we appreciate all the calls you made. We know from talking to legislative aides that there were all kinds of contacts that were passed in the House. It did not pass in the Senate. But those stories were still really important. They were passed along to the administration, and they were really instrumental in Governor Walz's decision to take $100 million of the money we receive from the federal government under the CARES Act and use that to directly address housing challenges for families. So that money, $100 million, is currently, that program's up and running at Minnesota Housing. You can go and look there if you need that or want to refer that to someone. But that provides that payments are made directly to landlords, to mortgage companies, to utility companies for people who are having challenges with those. So thank you for your advocacy, and we need to continue to share those stories. The second thing we asked you to talk about was bonding. You can't go anywhere in Minnesota without seeing a real lack of affordable housing, seeing the need for emergency shelter, and certainly in all of the areas that Westminster congregation members attend or live, we see that. There was agreement reached in the July special session. I'm guessing that would be the second special session, to really need to do something around bonding. There was not agreement from everyone that was needed because the bonding bills commit the state to obligations beyond the term of a particular legislative session, we need a 3/5 majority of people in order to approve those. So there is agreement by the Democratic leadership, which is in control in the House, and by the Republican leadership, which is in control in the Senate, that if a bill passed out of the House, the Senate would pass it for a bonding bill, which included $100 million for affordable housing. Unfortunately, the Republicans in the House would not support that bill, and we're really using the leverage in terms of a bonding bill to register their frustration with Governor Walz not being willing to share his emergency powers. And that frustration continues. You hear about that in a number of ways. But we have heard from legislators, from Republican legislators in the House, that they recognize the importance of a bonding bill, which is really a jobs bill, creating jobs across the state. We have all kinds of shovel-ready projects right now. So you'll be hearing this on September 20th. The February, or the session that will be held in September, first one at least, will have been completed without any action on bonding. And that's because the state will have been involved in the sale of bonds, and they can't change the fiscal condition of the state during a certain waiting period. And that period ends today, September 20th. So thank you for making sure that people hear about housing and the importance of that. We appreciate that. Please continue to make those calls, and we are quite optimistic that we will be having a bonding bill shortly. So I can't think of a time I've been to Westminster for services with you that we haven't had a song that talked about justice and prayers about justice. And we are so proud to have you as a partner for us in this justice work for the common good of Minnesotans. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing the rest of the program, as I'm sure you do.
And thank you for that update. If folks have questions about the legislative sessions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Even if we don't have a chance to discuss them today, we'll be sure to follow up on that. So with only 52 days until the general election on November 3rd, we really want to make sure that everyone feels informed about the elections and ready to vote. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Michelle. And if you could just talk us through some key voting information, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. As Mary mentioned, I am Michelle. I am from the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. If you don't know anything about MCN, to keep it short, we do research on the nonprofit sector, and we provide trainings and support for nonprofits in Minnesota. And lastly, we advocate for nonprofits at the Capitol. So for MCN, our priorities for elections this year is one, to support nonprofits so that they have all the resources and information they need to be able to educate the eligible voters on the elections. And then second, promote poll work because we need 30,000 poll workers to make an election happen in Minnesota. And because of the pandemic this year, we need to promote this more, and we need more poll workers. And then lastly, our last priority is to make sure that disenfranchised communities have access to voter education and understand how they can use their voice or use their vote to shape the communities that they live in. And so some key points for elections this year, such as like what seats are up for election. So the most important one of all is this year is we're going to be voting for the U.S. president. And then for Minnesota, we have one of Minnesota's U.S. Senate seats, which is currently held by Senator Smith. And then all 8 of Minnesota's U.S. House of Representatives seats will be up for elections. All 201 seats in the Minnesota legislature, Minnesota Supreme and Appellate Court judges, school boards, and city and county races. And then I have a map to show of Minnesota's 8 congressional districts. Let me share my screen. But I always like to give this visual because it took me a while to like know where the 8 congressional districts are in Minnesota. So here they are. As you can see, our 7th district, the darker blue, is like huge. So like the representative for the 7th district has to fly from north to south to meet with constituents, which I think is hilarious on my part, but probably not for him. But yeah, these are Minnesota's 8 congressional districts, and all seats for these districts will be up for election this year. And then lastly, some key general election dates. So November 3rd is the general election date. And then registration deadlines by mail online is October 13th. So make sure that you are registered on or by October 13th. And then you can also register in person on November 3rd. But because we are in a pandemic year, we want to make sure that everybody is voting from home or registering from home as much as possible, so that we can keep our democracy healthy and strong. So encourage folks to register by mail and online as much as possible. And then along that lines, voting from home is really important this year. So absentee voter deadlines are online and in person. That's the due date, November 2nd. And then you can submit it by mail or in person on or before November 3rd. So this year it's different because if you have your absentee ballot postmarked on November 3rd, it will still be accepted even if it is received after that. And then just a note, early voting is available 46 days before the election date. And so it begins September 18th. We are 7 days away from the first day of early voting. So keep that in mind. What that means is that you can vote absentee, so from home, or you can go to your local polling place and vote in person. And keep in mind again, we want to keep our communities healthy, and so early voting is like the best option for this year. All right, and that's all I have for general information about the elections.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Shonda, as an election judge, you have a unique experience, and I'm just wondering if you'd be able to share some of those experiences with us and tell us what that's like.
Yes, and thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to speak on being an election judge. I am a member of Greater Friendship Missionary Baptist Church and a part of our social justice and health ministry. And as Mary has stated, that I am also a board member of JRLC through the Minnesota Council of Churches. My journey with being election judge really came from going to Super Tuesday and being the first person there, and they needed help. And the goal was becoming a delegate. And so it kind of just spiraled into the opportunity to be election judge. And to be an election judge really gives you the opportunity to see kind of the full picture. And it is your responsibility not only to educate people who are there, but also prior, know kind of the rules that are in place. And so we have there are some issues going on of absentee ballots and how that process is. We have it if you had sent your absentee ballot in and happen to then just come to the polls, we can tell within our system if your ballot has been counted. And so that again is just a stumbling block that we have removed with the system. And If you want to come and vote and not get out your car, we do offer that. We have, as judges, you have both parties that will go out and make sure that is a very nonpartisan action that happens, which is very important. That as election judges, it is a space that is of different parties. So someone cannot say, oh, well, it's all Democrat or Republican or the Green Party. And as I looked this morning, it was, they have enough election judges for this year, yet they are still looking particularly for those who are Hmong speaking, as well as those of different parties. So they will always need that. But they did say that as of this morning, or as of September 2nd, they were full. But the experience is really about welcoming people into that space and know that their vote matters. A lot of them are excited to come and vote. And it is our responsibility to let them know that it is safe for them. And that's really just my passion, is to make sure to get that information out, to be there. Over this last year, I've seen a lot of change with ages, as well as different ethnic groups being present, which it is important to have our young people involved in this process, as well as different minority groups being a part of the process and not just going to vote. So that really is my kind of take on election, being an election judge and being a part of the process. I did want to read something, is really why I do advocacy within voting, really is what God has given me as my calling. And one scripture comes from Proverbs 31:8-9, is speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed. Yes, speak up for the poor and helpless and see that they get justice. So, thank you.
Thank you, Shonda. It's really valuable to have you add that unique perspective in, and to also root it in your faith, why that motivates you. I appreciate too mentioning, who is helping out at these poll places. I recently attended a webinar that the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits put on about the election this year, and Minnesota's Secretary of State, Steve Simon, was there, and he was talking about how his 2 asks for folks. Sorry, one second, I'm just going to put headphones. Sorry, I apologize for that. We are all living during COVID times, and there is events happening in our households. But as I was saying, he had 2 asks, which were to have people please consider voting from home, which Michelle touched on, and then also to consider being an election judge like Shonda. And a couple other key points that he mentioned, again, are that this year only, this was a special court ruling, if your ballot is postmarked by Election Day on November 3rd, as long as it is received by November 10th, it will be counted. So that's a special thing this year, really just making sure people know that. And then 14 days in advance of the election is when they will start counting ballots. Our localities count the ballots. So on election night, when we're hearing results come in, they will try and report how much a candidate is ahead by, and then they will also try and report how many outstanding absentee ballots there are, so that we'll have a sense where, maybe a candidate is ahead by 1,000 ballots, and there are only 700 outstanding. So if that's the case, then it is, they can reasonably conclude that that candidate won. So even as more voting by mail is happening, they're going to do their best as our Secretary of State, as our voting departments, to keep us informed on these issues. And then one other point I just want to mention is that even if you put in an absentee ballot and you find out that it's been rejected because the form was filled out wrong, they will work at their Secretary of State's office to contact you. You will have an option to have replacement materials. They will try and connect with you so that your vote can still count, and you'll be able to do that. So those are just a couple key points about absentee voting that I want to touch on. But aside from, yes.
I just had a couple of other things, and you just touched on it. If there is a ballot issue or someone has moved, the Secretary of State will send you a letter, so then you just bring that letter to the polls. And so we just read it, and we know then that it's one valid, and then we just go ahead and register you at the polls. And obviously, like you said, with the times of COVID, we make sure that when you go to the polls, first you are initially greeted kind of at the door, and making sure that your hands and everything is sanitized. Then they come to a second stop where they just make sure, are you in the right place? As a person who I've just kind of greeted people, but now I work at the poll book. I do poll book registration, which is the person who checks you in. Then we make sure that we are 6 feet apart, that we clean the area like every hour, and then you go on to get your ballot like you normally did, and they do still make sure that you are 6 feet apart with the dots on the floor. And then you go and you fill out your ballot, and you then put it in the machine. And then after you put it in the machine, you are then, make sure then to sanitize your hands, and we sanitize all the pens as well.
Thank you for that additional information. We really want people to feel like they have a safe voting plan. If you have that plan, if you've talked to friends about that plan, that also helps people make sure that they feel confident as they go about the election this year. So aside from knowing the key dates and processes, we also want to make sure that we talk about voter engagement strategies, right? If we know this information, how can we be sharing that with our other friends and family? So again, I want to turn this back to Michelle, who can talk to us about some of the resources and strategies that the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits has been recommending.
All right, so let me share my PowerPoint. This time I will put it in full screen. All right, so we already talked about voting in 2020, how it is a pandemic. Oh, this is the wrong one. I'm so sorry. 1 second. All right. So I have a couple of strategies to share. First one is voter registration. So voter registration is often the first step to voting. So nonprofits can do this, and 501c3s can do this. They can register their communities to vote, and you can do this at your nonprofit. You can do this at a grocery store, churches, mosque, community centers, parks. I have volunteered and registered folks at Asian grocery stores before, and it's really effective because we like table right at where the entrance is, and we catch folks as they go in and out. And oftentimes, I'm scared to do voter registration because I'm hesitant to talk to folks or take a little bit of their time, but a lot of times they are eager to learn more about voting and about the requirements of being an eligible voter and how voting can impact their lives. And so highly encourage you to do some voter registration if you're able, with your church or with your community too. All right, so a little bit more about voter registration. There's a couple of websites that have an online form where you can register folks, and I'll share them later. They are trusted resources for folks to fill out that form, but you can also request paper applications from the Minnesota Secretary of State's office, And once you have folks fill it out in person, you can then mail it back to the Secretary of State or drop it off. So you can help voters. I've been getting a lot of questions from nonprofits about like, hey, can we drive folks to the polls? You most definitely can, and you can help folks register. You can help folks find the link on how to request an absentee ballot. You just have to make sure that you have their consent first and that you aren't giving them any of your opinions about which candidates to vote for. So that is how you stay nonpartisan. So the deadline for returning paper applications is 10 days. So if someone fills out a paper application, they usually date it with the date, and then you have to return it 10 days after that, or within 10 days. Again, you can't offer incentives, but driving folks to the poll is not an incentive. Incentives would include something like money or winning a prize. And then this one is more for nonprofits, but nonprofits that are state agencies are required to do voter registration with the communities that they work with. So a little bit about National Voter Registration Day, which is coming up on the 22nd. Very exciting. You can sign up to be a partner via this link, and I will drop that in the chat after I'm done with these slides. But what it means to be a partner is you'll just promote National Voter Registration Day. So for MCN, we sign up to be a partner, and what we're doing is sharing what National Voter Registration Day, like I am doing right now, and also doing some email blasts on September 22nd to promote National Voter Registration Day. It's just a day of awareness. You can still register after that date or before. So if you sign up to be a partner, you can also access tons of resources. They have lots of great graphics for you to use on social media as well, stickers, posters, and some cool ideas about how you can COVID-proof your events. What else can you do? So I have a presentation that I go through like all of these tactics that you can use, but I condensed it for this. So some of the things you can do is you can create a website or a web page. So if you already have a website, you can create a web page about elections so that you can inform the communities that you work with about what elections are and what are the key dates. How do you know you're an eligible voter? How do you request absentee ballot? So those are some key things to put on your web page. Another thing you can do is social media. I love using social media, and so I often create pretty graphics using the website Canva. It's a really user-friendly graphic creating website, and I will also drop that in the chat after I am done sharing my slides. Just taking notes to do that. But Canva is amazing to use to create graphics to engage your audience. Also another thing about social media is I have found that it's you get more views or you get more likes when it's more personal to the organization. And so oftentimes I would grab when we were still in the office, I would grab one of my coworkers and say, hey, like, can you hold up the sticker that says, I will vote? And I take a picture of them and then put it on social media and tell a little bit of story about them and how they vote or why they think voting is important. And that generates a lot of likes and clicks. So doing something personal really, really helps engage folks. You can also include a reminder in your email signature if your organization uses email often to engage with your constituents or your communities. This is a really great way to just have like a subtle reminder. Hey, like if you click on this link, you can get some information about voting. And the general election is coming up on November 3rd. You can write a blog post. I love writing blog posts, and I had a really good example from Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity. Habitat. They had a really awesome blog post in 2018 about why voting matters, and then they tied it to housing and how voting impacts housing. So I just thought that was really cool and a really great example. So yeah, like just talk about like why voting is important, and then tie it into your values or your organization's mission. You can also send out an external email to your communities with resources on how to vote. And then lastly, you can distribute information. So the Secretary of State's office, they have a lot of really good posters and stickers, flyers, if you want to request them and then hand them out. They also have some social media graphics too that you can post on your social media. And then I just want to talk a little bit more about some strategies, right? So make voting accessible. We talked a little bit about disenfranchised communities, and I wanted to share a story about my grandma. So I'm Hmong, and my grandma was, she was a refugee, and she has been in the US for, I don't know, maybe over 20 years. And she has been a citizen for about 10 years now. And last year she voted for the first time because I took her to the polls and I told her, hey, Grandma, you know, like, you haven't voted before, and it's really important that you do because it really makes an impact on your neighborhood. It really makes an impact on the communities that you play and live in. And she voted for the first time, and it was just a really powerful moment to see my grandma, who like doesn't really understand English, being able to vote. And this is like a quote that a lot of organizers that I look up to say a lot. They want to, I want to see civic engagement that includes our grandmothers, because oftentimes civic engagement is not accessible to folks like my grandma, because it's often in English, or it's often using media that my grandmother doesn't consume. She watches a lot of Hmong TV and listens to Hmong radio. So how can we connect to these resources and think outside of the box so that we can reach folks like my grandma and folks like my little niece, Riona, who's also in the picture, so that we can encourage our young voters to vote when they are eligible. Another thing is to affirm voters. And so this is a really great example from Reviving the Sisterhood, or RISE. I asked them if I can use this because I just really love their message that they had circled in red here. Every vote counts, and because it's an election year, your vote is more important now than ever. So it's really sweet and simple, but also like very encouraging and signifying that there is importance in that person who's reading this voting, and that their vote counts. And lastly, make voter engagement fun. And so I love memes and use memes all the time through social media, and also even I put it in my emails just to connect with folks who are my age, because I know millennials love memes. GIFs is another thing that you can use as well. It really engages folks and makes voting fun, because sometimes voting can be really wonky. And it's relatable, right? Because I don't know if anybody else watches Mean Girls, but I love Mean Girls, and I know a lot of people do too. And then also make voting a habit. Voting is Once you vote, you're comfortable with voting, so you are more likely to vote again. And folks who vote oftentimes encourage their folks in their circle to vote, and so it's like a domino effect. That's why I think you should make it social, make it a habit, sit down and fill out your ballots together at the table with each other, invite your family to do it with you, because you can make voting fun. And that's all I have.
All right, thanks, Michelle. That was a lot of great information. I especially really liked you sharing the GIFs and memes, because I think, for younger people who aren't able to vote yet, that's a way where if we've got youth groups, if we have kids clubs, they can help design some of that stuff and be part of the elections process, even though they can't cast a vote yet. And I like that you brought up some of the work that Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity has done. And I know, Greta, that you have all done some really creative work and programming this year. And I'm wondering if you'd be able now to just kind of tell us more about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me today. As Mary mentioned before, my name is Greta Gates, and I'm the Policy and Advocacy Manager at Twin Cities Habitat. And we have really made voter outreach our priority at this time of year. I know that Habitat has done this historically, and it was great to hear an example of what we did in 2018. And I think for us, we've really thought of it as a way to engage what we see as our natural network of supporters, and thinking more broadly about how they can make change. Like, we have at Habitat this amazing core group of volunteers. We have over 16,000 volunteers that come and build with us every single year. So for us, we're like, how do we think about folks who are coming, they care about affordable housing, they want to contribute by building, but how do we expand our understanding of how to be civically engaged or how to make a difference? And so we really see getting people involved in advocacy and voting and elections work as one of those ways that we can encourage people to act. Kind of some other groups that we always think about working with are, we have some campus chapters, so college students that are also really passionate about Habitat and about housing, and we reach out to them. And then lastly, our partner families. So we have about 1,000 homeowners in the Twin Cities that own Habitat homes, and that's another group of folks that we are doing a lot of outreach to make sure that they have the information that they need in order to make decisions around voting and become engaged in the voting process. So this year specifically, we, like every other organization, have been adapting our voter engagement work due to COVID-19. And a lot of what we've been thinking about is how to convert some things that we've historically done into virtual and still accessible tools. So we've thought about, how are people communicating now? It seems like there are a lot fewer in-person events and a lot more Zooms like this webinar. And we also historically had really prepped people to have a lot of candidates come and door knock at their homes. But this year we've noticed that maybe that traditional model of candidate outreach might be used a little bit less. And like, I know I've been receiving a ton of texts on my phone from different candidates or different volunteers. And so we're trying to think about like, what are ways that people can communicate back to people who are campaigning and still kind of get our message across and our values across. So I want to share just a few different specific projects that we're working on to see if these might inspire some ideas about how to get more involved. So as Michelle mentioned, one of the things that organizations can do is build a web page around elections. So Habitat did that. This is our kind of elections resource center, we're calling it. And it's really for us like a clearinghouse for all of our voter education information that we're putting out this year. So if Mary, scrolls down a little bit, you can see what we're doing is we're going to be uploading our different elections blog series on here. So we have a couple that have been published so far, on one on like a voting 101, a lot of those key dates that have been covered in this webinar. And then the second in our series so far is really similar to the blog Michelle mentioned earlier, It's called How to Get Housing on the Ballot. And for us, it's, again, just sort of a way to tie voting back to our mission and our value system as Habitat, and think about, as a nonprofit, how do we encourage folks to consider these types of values when they're casting their vote? Some other resources that we put on here is this next resource I'm really, really excited about. We're calling it our Candidate Conversation Guide. And so I think we can look at this a little bit more blown up. So this is a resource that we sent to our stakeholder groups as a mailer, and we're also including it in a blog and on our resource center and in an e-newsletter. But for us, we traditionally had done this as something we used to call a reverse door knocker. So if a candidate came to knock on your door and said, I'm running for office and, can I have your vote? We sent this out to our supporters as something that they could have as sort of like a response card to have a conversation with that candidate. So the first page here is basically just key dates. But if you get down into the second page of the conversation guide, this really gives the folks who are living at the homes that are getting door knocked an opportunity to have a dialogue with that candidate and ask them questions about their value systems and try to see how those align. And so we provide some example questions you could ask about affordable homeownership, about producing affordable housing. We have a question about racial disparities in homeownership specifically. And then another question about COVID-19 and providing housing stability through that. And so we provide some questions and then also some talking points. So it's a way for our supporters to educate candidates or volunteers on the issue of housing, even while they're kind of in that interaction itself. So that's one major resource that we just put out. And then if you go back to the resource center, there's kind of one final thing we have here, which is our pledge to vote in the election. And so this voter pledge drive is just another idea we have about further engaging folks to make a commitment to vote this year. And we have a goal of getting 1,000 pledges. This just went live, I think, today. So we're not quite to 1,000, but we're excited to get there. And we'll look forward to uploading more resources on this resource center website as the election season continues. And then I just wanted to share a few more things kind of outside of the screen sharing resources, but a few other strategies that we're going to incorporate are we're going to do like a Voters of Habitat blog and social media series. And so really highlighting, as Michelle said, making it personal, really highlighting our staff and homeowners and supporters who are going to be voting this year, and kind of talking to them about like what motivates you to vote, why is this important to you? And so really making sure that we have a diversity of voices that is represented there, and thinking about the different folks that intersect with Habitat and why voting is important to them. We're going to be trying to incorporate get out the vote efforts in pretty much every communication we do with our internal staff and external audiences from now to November, just constantly kind of pushing the message to get out the vote. And then we're also partnering with others. So we participated in a candidate questionnaire that went out through some of our housing coalition partners in Homes for All and the Minnesota Housing Partnership to ask candidates how they're going to be voting, ask candidates how they are thinking about the issue of housing specifically, and try to get kind of an assessment from them about where they line up on those issues. And then finally, we're really encouraging our network to further mobilize their network. And so part of our voter pledge drive and our voter outreach is not only like asking our stakeholders and supporters to vote themselves, but also seeing if they can ask like 3 friends or 4 family members or somebody they work with, what their voting plan is too. And I think that's a way to kind of keep the outreach going and keep the network expanding even beyond just the people that we touch.
Thanks, Greta. Those are all really helpful resources. And I think it's great that these are things that as people are engaging with their communities, their smaller circles, they can use these resources. Again, one of the points that came up during the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits recent webinar was that, you know, getting community organizations involved, whatever that is defined as, is so important because we have these relationships and this type of trust. So we're going to head over, sorry, my dog is here. We're going to head over to some of our questions that we have. So let me just pull those up. So I do see one that I'll answer quickly. Can people check the status of their ballot on the Secretary of State website? And you can. I can even try and pull that up right now. If you go to the Secretary of State's website, you can see a lot of their different resources. Register to vote. If you go to this section, you can check on your registration and more. So that's really helpful. They have multiple languages. See if my internet will be fast enough to load it. There you go. It talks through a lot of the questions people might have, how to register if you're a college student, if you're living abroad, if you're concerned about safety, checking your registration. And then once you do have your absentee ballot, you can, again, check once it's received and when it's been counted. So just a question I wanted to answer there, and would encourage you to check out the Secretary of State website often. You can just go to mnvotes.org. And I see another question that I think, Shonda, maybe you can answer this one. How are poll volunteers going to be utilized? Do you have any insight on that?
Yes, and that's what I was kind of going through. We have some that are kind of initially, you know, at the door that you come in. So we make sure that your hands are sanitized, everyone is wearing a mask. And then you go to kind of another location. Again, they just verify that you're in the right polling place. And we then have, I am a poll book specialist, so that I'm there just to make sure that we get you signed in. If you're new to the area, we re-register you right then and there. And then we have those who are then handing out the ballots. So, and then of course, those who are, when you actually put your ballot into the machine, we have those that are there making sure that your hands are sanitized when you leave, and then sanitizing all of the pens. And so I probably at least each polling place right now, like the last one I just did, there was at least 8 of us on a shift. And I usually work at 2 p.m. to close.
Thank you, Shonda. All right, so I do see another question that was asked about working in higher education. Several schools are working on educating students about voting options, and the Secretary of State has great resources. Do we have any other information to share? And Michelle offered that Lead MN and Campus Compact are 2 nonprofits that folks can tap into, and they'll have more specific information on elections for students as well. Thank you, Michelle. Could we also talk about early voting in person at government centers? Can someone walk us through that, please? Is there anyone who would like to take that on? I can speak to what I know from personal experience is that you can, if you request your absentee ballot, you can bring it directly into the location that you would be mailing it to as well. And you can also find out about your other polling locations that you could drop it to. For example, I have family in Duluth, Minnesota, and we can bring it to our county clerk office ahead of time. And I've had relatives who've done that. I see one of our attendees said that they have done in-person voting. They did that for the primary and was in and out in about 10 minutes as well. So very efficient. Does anyone have other recommendations about ways churches can help get folks to the polls?
Hi again, this is Shonda. I think when we are looking at how the churches can assist in transportation, really looking at some of the churches that have vans or buses and really collaborating with those churches. And then kind of coming up with a sign-in sheet. I think that's an opportunity that we have with our churches, as well as obviously within our different ministries, that say if you have deacons and deaconess, that they can kind of do outreach within their ministries and say, okay, who needs a ride? So there's opportunities, you know, for us. It's just kind of collaborating.
Thank you, Shonda. I think that's great. And I think, you know, you could even do that if there's a Bible study night, maybe when you regularly get together, bringing people to polling locations early to drop off their ballot, kind of like we were talking about. Maybe that's something folks could also do.
Yeah, and it's something that I think many churches have kind of their social justice Sunday or a newsletter that we send out. That's an opportunity for us then to reach out to people and say, do you want to ride, or, you know, get the information out that the churches are providing this, whether we have some people in our communities are not a part of the church, but we still want to get out the opportunity for transportation.
Shonda, while we have you, who would folks contact if they do want to be a poll volunteer?
You would actually just go to the Secretary of State website and sign up. And I was going to just put that in the chat as well. And many people don't know, working at the polls, you have an option of being just a volunteer, or you do have the option of actually getting paid. One of the great things, and I didn't figure that part out about getting paid probably till after a couple of times of volunteering, is they also then provide a letter, a statement that is coming from the state, that your employer has to give you that time off. And so, and they make sure that you give that letter at least about 2 weeks ahead. And again, depending on your relationship with your employer, like I could give mine a week ahead and say, hey, you know, I'm going to go and volunteer. And they give you that time off. But again, that is something that they can't say no to.
Thanks, Shonda. That's really helpful.
Yes.
And one other point I just want to give a shout out to about resources is the League of Women Voters of Minnesota covers the entire state, and many communities have a local availability to help with that. So they're a great resource. They provide nonpartisan information as well. So that's definitely something to check out. And I can put together even just like a one-pager for folks after this, where we've dropped a lot of resources and links that we recommend, but I can put them all together so that it's easy to circulate. Another question I see, what if people have trouble while trying to vote? I'm assuming that means on election day at the polls. Shonda, coming back to you, do you have anything you could offer on that?
Yes, if we're talking about one, you know, it's against the policies, the rules, we cannot say who. What we can do is really encourage people, they can use their phones if they need to research something, but it is something that we cannot help as far as saying, you know, it's this person or that party. It is strictly saying you have to vote in this particular, you know, one party or the other. And I mean, but you do have the option of doing your research and stepping out and saying, you know, I need to look and see. but there is no communication, beyond that. And physically, we do have a machine for those who might have some physical difficulties, and whether it's Braille, those who are hearing impaired. So we do have machines that accommodate that as well. We have it that if you need someone with you, because I think like Ms. Michelle had spoken about, if we have a lot of our elders, they may have someone who comes with them, and that is allowed. So that is an option, and you do have it where one person can vouch up to, I think it's 8 people, as far as to where they live. So those are another layer of options to remove the barriers of having issues with voting.
Yes, absolutely. Is anyone aware of organizations that would be helping match drivers with people who may need a ride?
This is Anne. I'm not aware of any nonpartisan organizations that do that, but it's fairly common for the local parties to be willing to help people find rides if there's a problem. So if people contact the DFL, the Republican Party, the Green Party, whatever that might be, they are often willing and able to assist with that.
Thank you, Anne.
And
Shonda?
to kind of, piggyback off of that, one of the things Lyft and Uber had provided free rides on election day. Right now, I've not heard if they're going to do that again. So those are some avenues that we can kind of follow up on and see what we can do, kind of push that option.
Thanks, Shonda. One other point, just with regard to the question about if people are having trouble voting, one of our attendees has said that the chief judge can be approached and complaints can be lodged and recorded with that individual. So that's something worth noting. And then just kind of another shout out to encouraging more diversity in our election judges. Sandy mentioned that she appreciated Michelle's comments about making people like her grandmother feel more comfortable at the polls by providing Hmong translators, etc. And so this is, reaching out to networks, virtual judges is a great idea. It looks like we are coming up on the end of our time. Again, if we have more resources, we will pull them together. If you have other questions, feel free to reach out. All of our emails, I can make sure that those are sent along. But thank you for joining us and rolling with us throughout this process. I will turn it back now to Reverend Elena.
Thank you so much, Mary, for facilitating our time. Thank you, Sandy, for hosting today and for framing the urgency now more than ever with our voting. And when you are watching this forum on September 20th, it will already be possible for you to vote. Early voting begins September 18th. So please do carefully and thoughtfully exercise your right to vote. Thank you to Mary and to Greta and Michelle and Shonda and Anne for sharing your knowledge and preparing us to vote thoughtfully. I would also like to say we hope that you will continue to be with us throughout the fall as we continue our social justice forum. Our next forum, we will invite Adair Mosley, who is the president and CEO of the Pillsbury United Communities, to come and talk to us about food injustice and the development of the North Market. It is a full-service grocery store, a center for wellness services, and a community gathering place that started because of the good work of Pillsbury United Communities. We hope you'll join us for that conversation. Thank you so much. Peace be with you.